So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I have now switched to English. I bid our guests welcome up on stage. And please do finish, but maybe without smacking. Okay. My name is Nina Larea. I'm head of program at Union to Union, and I'm very happy today to welcome you to this very informal talk on fair trade and trade union relations in specifically the plantation work. And we have with us today Zachary Kiari, originally from Kenya, now working as project manager in Bonn at Fair Trade International with responsibility on workers' rights and trade unions. Willkommen. Very good. But with a specific experience from rose farming in Kenya. We also welcome Magdalena Streifert, Secretary General of Fair Trade Sweden, and Christer Välevara, International Strategist at 6F, the Swedish, which is the conglomeration of Swedish unions affiliated to Building and Woodworkers International.
Just five. No,
whatever. Exactly. Involved in a lot. As consumers, we are, of course, in Sweden. We're not the leading nation in buying fair trade certified products. Yeah. Yet. If we talk about bananas, for example, we know that in Switzerland, 60% of the sold bananas in Switzerland are fair trade certified. In London, 50%. In Sweden, we're still at only 20%. In the rose business, we're up at 30%. But as consumers and as buyers of these products, when we choose fair trade, we're still maybe not completely informed what the certification actually means. And there are questions about the workers' rights. What does it mean for a worker to work at a fair trade certified plantation or farm? And does it actually mean that they can have trade unions? Those are questions that at least I ask myself when I buy these bananas. So today I would like to first invite Zachary to actually give us a small presentation on how this works, what happens in the rose fields in Kenya. And then Magdalena and Christer are going to give their picture of how we work with the certification in Sweden and with trade unions. And then we'll open up for some questions from you in the audience. So Zachary, please. Bitte.
Thank you. Yeah. Good afternoon once again. I have one slide that I would want us to look at, and that slide is going to, in my opinion, trigger our discussion and our debate this afternoon. Because when we look at workers in fair trade, we give a lot of emphasis to them. The mere fact that actually fair trade has invested in me and my colleague, Wilbert Frinterman, who is my senior advisor, shows the commitment that fair trade as an organization attaches to workers, not only in plantations, but going forward, we are also starting to think about workers in the smallholder organizations. So it's a vast landscape of work with different activities, including the now trending topic of living wage, among others, trade union relations, working conditions in plantations. So I'll only give one slide that will trigger our discussion, and as much as possible try to capture all the work streams, all the activities that fair trade is engaging in the field of workers' rights. How does it go?
Yep.
We can't see the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a statement from a trade union general secretary in Malawi, Mary Tambala, and she says fair trade has played a big part in training the leaders, including herself, on collective bargaining through the international IUF Malawi representative. We have submitted a draft agreement for approval to the Tea Association in Malawi. She's the Deputy Secretary General, Plantation and Agricultural Workers Union of Malawi. This was a new union formed in Malawi specifically to address the challenges of workers in the tea sector of Malawi. When we go further still in the tea sector in Malawi, early this month, on the 7th and 8th, Fairtrade, in collaboration with 20 other organizations, signed an agreement with Oxfam, ETP, and other industry actors to achieve a living wage. That's why I'm saying there is a capacity building element in our work of the trade unions, and it's intertwined with the topic of living wage. In terms of collaboration with other unions, in Ghana, the Agricultural Workers Union of Ghana, and the local IUF representative, Banana Link, we are working on capacity building of banana plantation workers, training on corrective bargaining, negotiation skills, dispute resolution and conflict management, and protection on women, including policies on sexual harassment. In Cameroon, we have, for the last 2 years, been working again with IUF on a capacity building program with banana plantations in Cameroon, where we have 6 plantations coming together and creating a common platform that can engage the management and champion or address the interests of the workers. And in November, early next month, on the 3rd and 4th, we shall be in Nairobi with local representatives of IUF in Africa and our team, the producer-facing side, Fairtrade Africa, and myself and my colleague, Wilbert Frinterman. We shall be starting to explore ways on how we can collaborate our work on the ground. So I hope this gives a synopsis of our work, touching on the topic of living wage, and I think that can stimulate our discussion.
Thank you, Zachary. Just to be clear, IUF is the International Union Federation for Agriculture, Food, Beverage, Hotel, Restaurant, and Tourism Workers. So, in fact, what you're saying, Zachary, is there is not a contradiction between the fair trade work and the collaboration with IUF, whose mission it is to train and strengthen trade unions in the countries. So could you tell me a little bit about the difference here between being able to certify a farm with fair trade and stamp its produce with the fair trade label, and the different forms of, you're saying here we have some bargaining for collective agreements. There's an agreement between different organizations. Are the farmers, the owners or employers, are they involved in these agreements? So what would you say is the difference between the collective agreement and the other agreements that you have in order to be able to actually stamp the roses or bananas or tea with the fair trade label?
Thank you. When we have a fair trade certified setup, workers in those setups today are making a career out of their work. There is security of employment, there is protection of women, there is protection from health and safety protection, including social security, which, unlike certified setups, workers do not enjoy those benefits. That's for starters, the distinction between certified operations, plantations, and non-certified operations, including the all-important element of collective bargaining, where you find in non-certified setups, there's no framework, there's no platform for workers to negotiate their terms and conditions of employment. From our standards perspective, it's a requirement that the management and the workers must progressively work towards collective bargaining employment, which is pegged on the topic that we are now, the topic or the project, one of the key projects that I'm now managing, the project of living wage, in that it's now very clear from the fair trade perspective, following the revision of our standards last year, that plantations must work towards closing the gap between the minimum, closing the gap towards the living wage. Prior to that, we had a requirement that did not have the tools. Which tools am I talking about? I'm talking about living wage benchmarks. In the current standards now of fair trade has made it very clear that it's going to set and approve living wage benchmarks, and employers are supposed to demonstrate compliance. In the same breath, when we are now setting the benchmarks, you might ask, which benchmarks? What methodology are you using? We have come up with a common definition of what is a living wage, and we have come up with a methodology that it's now more clear than before on what we expect the plantations to comply with. The beauty of it all is that we are not doing it in isolation. We are doing it in a coalition with other certification schemes. We have 6 certification schemes: Rainforest Alliance, UT Certified, Good Weave, SAI, Forest Stewardship Council, and Fair Trade, coming together and forming, we are calling it the Living Wage Coalition, with a full-time secretariat based in London at the ICIL offices, and with a full-time staff employee to coordinate our activities. And how are we going about it? We came to a common definition based on an internationally acclaimed methodology developed by Professor Richard Anker and his wife. Richard used to work for the International Union, with the ILO, International Labour Organization, and is a polished economist. He came up with a simple and clear definition with a methodology that we have found that it's connecting with both the producers. The workers also understand it because it's zeroing down on their local situation. It's not using what we might call secondary data. It's using primary data. The situation on the ground, the local living conditions, the eating habits, the decent housing, health and safety, all those factors are being considered. And of course, the all important topic that employers have always said, oh, the in-kind benefits have to be factored in. The methodology has looked into that. So, within the coalition, we have gone further. Mother and Richard developed the methodology, but there are only 2 of them. They cannot go in every country doing the benchmarks. They have actually been involved in 4 benchmarks directly. One was in the Dominican Republic for bananas. It's published, it's on our website, the report. Number 2 was the Cape growing wine region in South Africa for wine. Number 3 was Malawi. And number 4 was Kenya for flowers, the semi-urban setup where we generate a lot of flowers. Now, the approach is, in May this year, we trained more researchers who will go out so that, in line with our commitment as Fair Trade, that in all operations where we certify, we should have a benchmark. We want to generate those benchmarks and they should be enforced by the year 2016. across the board. That's the timeline.
So, a last question to you before I ask Magdalena to give her description of the banana sector in Dominican Republic, which I know she recently visited. But do you actually, this coalition is, first of all, is there a common view on that collective bargaining should be a standard to setting living wages, apart from these benchmarks, to avoid the risk of the benchmarks becoming a new sort of minimum wage benchmark? And if collective bargaining is not included in the fair trade arguments when certifying, how will you then see that living wages are argumented towards the employers?
Thank you. The approach is that the benchmarks should not replace or undermine the collective bargaining process. Rule of the thumb. And how are we addressing that? First, we are building the capacity of the unions. That's why we have been working with the local representatives we have started working with the local representatives of the unions in certain setups. We have also developed modules, training modules on collective bargaining, dispute resolution, workers' rights, and we will be rolling out the first phase for Africa at the end of this month for 10 days in Tanzania. So, in answer to your question, we do not, within the coalition, want to undermine the collective bargaining process. And that's why we are going a step further by building the capacity of the unions so that it's clear, it's very, very clear that the living wage is not going to, for example, as you have correctly pointed out, become a sort of new minimum wage. No. That is not the approach. And maybe from fair trade perspective, the element of collective bargaining has been very well clearly outlined in the standards. It's the starting point that plantations are audited against when it comes to enforcing our requirements on collective bargaining. So starting from that point, then the expectation is that if through the collective bargaining process, the firm or the companies are not able to close the gap between the benchmark that fair trade has set, then we sit down on a table and come up with discussions to explore different mechanisms that can be used to input towards closing the gap between, towards a living wage. And we have a good example from Malawi, where we recently, as I said, early this year, signed an agreement. So many components come into force. There were discussions, for example, can fair trade use part of the premium money that workers get from their sales to complement the living wage? Can fair trade maybe, for example, work on its pricing mechanism and revise the minimum prices, and the different markup can be used to top up the living wage? So it's very clear in terms of approach, expectations, and mitigation of the risks so that we don't undermine the collective bargaining process. Thank you.
Thank you, Zachary. Magdalena, welcome to the stage. My question to you, you were recently in the Dominican Republic. What was the view on the banana farming, on the relationship between fair trade certification and the trade unions?
Thank you, Nina, for that. And I think what Zachary now told you about also was a good collaboration in Africa. And maybe also because we have better connection there and better collaboration is due to the fact also that the plantation owner sees trade unions a quite natural part of collaboration. In other parts of the world, it's more difficult, and especially some parts of Latin America. And just as Zach said, actually, that in our criteria, it actually says that we're going to close the gap between the current salary and the living wage, and it should be done, of course, in a negotiation between the trade union and the management. With that said, there are then in plantation owner in some countries, as in Dominican Republic, that says we don't like the trade unions. They're crap. To be honest, I mean that's what they say. So then why should we collaborate with them? Because they just want to, they just have their own interest. Or my membership goes to they buy a nice car and so on. I think it's quite common in some countries that the workers and plantation owners see trade unions like that, and that's a reality we need to bear in mind. And that's not then the standards is not the only thing, because you could say like that, and when the audit goes there, it says, we allow the trade unions to come here. But they haven't done that much about it. And then say, okay, check with that. And that's why I think fair trade also is quite unique, because we don't only have standards and audits, we do also have so-called license officers, people supporting the plantation owners and the workers in those countries where we are. And in Dominican Republic, they said this is, yes, but because in Fair Trade Sweden, together with Fair Trade Ireland, is actually leading the work regarding living wage in the National Fair Trade Organization, because we now think we need not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk. So, and then we went there. And then the producer network said, this is really a hot topic, please help us out. And then we arranged a roundtable discussions, and we invited the trade union Federlac, because we want to support them, unionize the workers at Fair Trade certified plantation. We invited the plantation owners, and we were at 3 markets there. It was Sweden, it was UK and Ireland. And from the market perspective, I think it was important to be there saying, well, 95% of the fair trade bananas in Sweden sold coming from Dominican Republic, and we expect you to actually give the workers a living wage, because otherwise we will, the consumer will say, hey, hang on here, this is not good enough. And then, and it should go through also the trade unions. And then the plantation owners, they had a lot of skepticism, and they were actually, in the beginning, people were standing, shouting at each other. That's how it could be in some countries, not Sweden, but other countries. And we had this roundtable discussion for like 5 hours. And in the end, actually, when we met the people, okay, you're normal people from trade union. Okay, maybe you said something that was quite good. You said about, the workers' rights about this and this. And they realized, well, we actually want to achieve the same thing, good living and working conditions for the workers in the banana industry. And we are facing some challenges together. So please, okay, so maybe this was a good thing here. And then they said, well, just have another roundtable discussion, and let's discuss then. Because we have the benchmark from DomWeb. We know what the living wage should be. And it's a lot of premium money actually going into also the plantations and for the workers. Maybe we can use some of those money to achieve that. Maybe we can, start trainings for the workers to be more a stronger position when they do the negotiations. So actually, we did actually agree upon that, and there will be a second meeting quite soon. But I think also, it's important to know that there are also, this was a quite good trade union. There could be, in some countries, some regions actually, there could be trade unions that's not as that good, And then it's hard for us to say, we know it's not a good trade union, but please, you need to work with them. And that's why I think I should soon stop. I know. But maybe that's how can we work together with that, the trade unions and fair trade internationally. There are also plantation owners that we need to discuss with. If you want to be fair trade certified, there are some rules, you know, please. But also the trade unions, please, because it should be open, democratic trade unions, and some of them are not really okay working with. So then it's also your responsibility, I think, as well to, yeah, kick some ass.
Some strong words from fair trade to the trade union. I think instead of asking Magdalena questions, I think the kick-ass question will now go to Krister. What we've seen here now, quite a few, you're going to show picture?
I think so,
yeah.
But you talk.
Yeah. So we've seen here actually first a very good example of the farm workers unions having a very big influence in the negotiations. We've also heard that it's hard to make the collective bargaining or the recognition of trade unions a premium requisite for being certified, because in some places minimum living wages may be in place, or premium pay may be used for workers' decent working conditions. But Krister, please tell us what is the trade union doing here to work together with fair trade, and from its perspective, in what way do you kick ass, and do you kick your own union's asses? Sorry for the language here today.
Well, it's a direct language, and you've always been direct, Nina, so thank you for that. I will come back to the accusations of trade union not being really good trade unions, but I will actually highlight first what is 6F. 6F is actually a cooperation between 5 unions. And why do we call ourselves 6F? That you can ask after the break or when we are finished. But anyway, it's the construction unions, it's also the service, communication, and property workers. And we are actually representing in 4 different global union federations. Actually 4 out of totally 12, which is divided in similar to what we have in Sweden and all around the world, different sectors and branches. And of course, I need to start with a fundamental thing for a trade union and what we are really working with. And that's what's displayed here. Is there anyone that doesn't know what ILO is? Please raise a hand. Does everyone know ILO? Okay. What is unique by ILO? It's a tripartite system. It's a tripartite negotiation system. And it's the government, it's the employers, and it's of course the trade unions. And what we have done through the years is, of course, the core conventions. Core conventions is the fundament for anyone to get organized. And on top of that, of course, also take industrial actions, but of course also negotiate collective agreements. That is fundamental. But another thing that has happened also quite recently, but we're not talking about it so much, at least not in the broad civil society, and not, so to say, also in the political arena. Well, it's starting to heaten up because of the new development goals that we have, because decent work is put into number 8, I think it is. But the decent work agenda is actually the tool for implementing all of these core conventions, and of course others also. And of course that is something that we are already committed to, because all the ones sitting in ILO, or all the governments, all the trade unions and employers has said yes to the decent work agenda. But when they arrive at home, they're not really working with it. And some unions don't even work with it. But there are much more of governments and employers just disrespecting it when they come back home. Okay, that's the fundament. Shortly, there's a vivid circus traveling around the world, and it's called CSR. CSR is quite okay. But then a few years back, I think it's like 2.5 years back, we were at the meeting. I was the director at LOTCO then. And we met Hans Rosling, and he got the question, what's your opinion on CSR? I don't get it, he said. I mean, CSR is okay, but if you have CSR and you don't have law, what do you have then? Well, it's more like charity. And of course, I'm not accusing CSR, but I think that you need to carry on board the ILO core standards. The fundament for one thing, which is to set up unions, to form unions that when you join together in a group of people, you can actually then start to negotiate better terms and conditions. And of course, CBA, collective bargaining agreements, is the tool. The tool for getting a piece of the profit. Of course, the employers in some states, Bangladesh, for an example, or Cambodia, why do they put military on the street when textile workers go out on strike? Well, they are scared shitless of that. They will lose the investments from the big corporations. There's no question about it. And of course, the owners are also afraid that they will also lose the benefits. But what happens in a system is, of course, also when you have that system in place with collective bargaining agreements, well, what you could do is also start to have intakes of tax. And tax is also something which is a political tool to reimburse the ones that needs and the ones that has. So I mean, together, that doesn't really just make decent work. It really makes a decent life. And I strongly believe that fair trade is on the task of doing something that I think you should have done way back. But I'm glad we're doing it now, because Zachary, when you're saying what has been going on in Malawi, I've been in Malawi, involved in Malawi for 15 years. And I mean, it's a groundbreaking thing to get this recognition in place, because that's a really tripartite decision and discussion, but it's also a learning process. And I strongly believe that fair trade, together with the Global Union Federation and also some national centers, could actually work much more stronger together. Benchmarking, but also joint partnership. Of course, I will end this one with saying sustainable development through inclusive growth. Because there's this, wow, private sector and growth is the key to combat, poverty. But I will say, yes, it is, but is it really inclusive? Does it include everyone? No, it doesn't really. So this is a concept that I wouldn't take the credit for it. I will say that it was Karin Lindström at LOTCO that put this together. And I still really, every time I have the chance to stand like this, I take it. So back to the unions, okay? All unions are not unions. That is something we need to remember. Some unions are even set up by the employers. Look-alike unions or trying to work like unions, but that's a way of employers to get around having to deal with unions. Okay. Yellow unions, that's what we call it in Sweden. I think it's also a global thing set up by the owner. But, my friends, there are rules about what is supposed to be able to be called a union. And in some cases, I will reflect to one. I learned in 2008 when I worked with the Africa groups together with the Swedish construction in front of the World Cup 2010. We had a strong relationship with the Cape area, Southern Cape, and there was a women's movement, Sekolasonke. Yeah. And they refused to affiliate to the National Center. And we were furious, why don't you do it? And we started to actually have this 3-4 hour debate or discussion. And of course, at that time, it was also the municipal workers, Kommunal. I think there's someone from Kommunal here. Not really getting it because, Kosato is Kosato, But, the women said, we don't believe in Kosato. There is too much corruption. There's too bad things going on. But slowly, since then, they have moved, but they also start to talk to each other. So it's like not a peace process, but it's a dialogue process. Okay, it's one of those examples, and I strongly believe that what we can do, because what we do is that we check them. We check them through the Global Union Federation. We check them through union to union when we do development cooperation. And we also check them, are they really representing? What are they representing? Who are they representing? And of course, a union didn't start on the national level. A union started on the worksite level. Then it became an idea. Maybe we should have a national union, because that covers a bigger region, a state, and that makes also collective agreement something. It's a peace tool, actually. It's a peace tool because what we do sell from the trade unions are actually peace on the labor market. And if you want to read about the Swedish history, you can get this from union to union, because that's the way towards decent work and decent life. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you the whole history. Some of you already know it better than I. I see a guy from TCO. He was the international head of SACO for many, many years. So that's my small presentation. I think that we have achieved quite a lot, but we have a little bit more to do on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, the three of you. I think it's not really necessary for me to stand here and ask you questions. First of all, you've already answered a lot of my questions, and I'm really happy about it, and seeing the development with closing the gap also between trade unions and fair trade, and in that way creating synergy effects. There is the need definitely of more collaboration and work on the ground, and I'm also happy to say that the Swedish new strategy for support to civil society actually promotes what we call not only capacity building but capacity mobilizing. This is mobilizing the rich capacity of different organizations and different civil society actors. And when including trade unions as civil society actors, we also get the business side of the whole equation. So basically, I will actually open up now, because I see all of you are really eager to ask questions now. I hope so, at least. If you don't, I will ask some questions. But I'm opening up the floor, so please, do we have any questions? And please present yourself, where you come from, and who you want to address your question to.
And use the mic.
Yes. Har vi en till mick, va? Eller? Nej, då tar du micken. Yes.
Där var det.
Okay, thank you. My name is Maria Logus. I represent My Right, that is the Swedish Disability Movement and their development cooperation. I'm here mainly to listen, because I'm very curious about possible strategic partners for our rights-based work in our partner countries, starting with right and opportunities for education. But next step, of course, is where we have ended up in some countries, also having really persons with disabilities having had education, being prepared for their working life. So when I saw the invitation and said decent work for all and life salary for all, I was just very curious, who are all? Have the issue, has the idea about persons with disabilities on the labor market been dealt with? And in that case, what can you say? What is the situation? Thank you.
Who would like to answer the question? Maria, do you have a...
I can start.
Yeah, start. Yeah, please.
And that's, yeah, okay. Thank you. It's a really good question, and when I was actually in, because we also, you need to follow the convention of ILO, and one of them is non-discrimination, and also that goes for disabled persons. But I think, I mean, it's if we think it's a challenge on the Swedish labor market, it's even worse in those countries, and I think you have to start also working as an NGO as well in those countries. I was in DomRep recently, as I said before, Dominican Republic, and then some of the premium money from one of the SBOs, it's a banana cooperative, they actually financed a school for 86 children, disabled children, that otherwise actually would be, you know, locked in somewhere. And seeing, you know, the possibility we can do by buying fair trade bananas for those people, that's a start. But, you know, you have to start there. And then actually there was one older guy who actually then got a job at that plantation. But I don't know every country, but you know, I know we need to start quite in a low basic, like they should get education, they shouldn't be locked in somewhere, and that's I think fair trade could help with as well. But besides having the ILO conventions, of course, but that's one thing. The other thing is to support and help those people in those countries.
So non-discrimination is a part of fair trade.
Yeah, so if you have a disabled, you know you shouldn't be. But with that said, yeah.
Christer.
Thank you for the question, Maria, from My Rights. I think it's a good question, and I've been spending quite some time thinking about partnerships, and I think that I'm not only thinking, I know there's a possibility that we could actually have a round table and sit down, quite a lot of us. I mean, I will take another example. I met with Save the Children a few years back, and of course, when you think about Save the Children, you think about children, and you think about child labor. But if you don't work with the parents that doesn't have good conditions, you don't get these kids to go out of work and into schools. So I mean, that's one example, and I know that we are having now in-depth talks with, for an example, the Paralympic Swedish Committee. That's not really the name of them, but you know what I'm saying. And of course, we have that because we have this decent work campaign for the big events like the Olympic Games and also, of course, the World Soccer Cup. And we join forces actually around the table against the other big ones, like the Soccer Association, because it's inbuilt in your, it's not only a value, it's like pumping in your blood even. And that's what I saw directly, that there's a link, and I think that we should explore that much more. So please, let's be in contact.
Okay, my name is Anders Corneliusson. I come from the Swedish Painters Union, and I was a little bit curious about the living wage, and I understand there is a kind of a model to find out how big it should be. I'm not aware of it, but I'm going to find out after this meeting. But when you're putting up the living wage, I work with negotiations and I work with wages and law in Sweden, and I was a little bit curious because what I've seen in the international debate, for an example, in US and UK now, they talk about the minimum wage system because the minimum wage system has been what's normal, not the minimum wage system. So the debate is how to raise the minimum wages quite a lot. And I saw the UK debate, and that's a conservative government talk about to raise the minimum wage in UK very high, just because the minimum wage is now standard. And I guess you have reflecting on this one too when we talk about to have a living wage system. But how do you reflect on it? Because it's when you put up a system, it seems to be what's going to be the normal, and how to raise it after that. That's the big question, I think. So I wonder how you think about it.
Thank you. Coming back to my, what we are using at the moment as the current pilot. When you look at the Malawi case, we developed in consultation with all the industry stakeholders, the TIP Association of Malawi, the government, the trade union, fair trade, Oxfam, the business side. We had a big presence of the major tea buyers from the UK. They came up with a 5-year plan. And the 5-year plan encompasses not just the element of the living wage, it also looks at productivity, at all the ingredients that goes into working towards a sustainable business. So it's not a question of us developing a benchmark and tomorrow telling you guys, you have to comply, you have to pay this amount. When we sit in the round tables with all the actors, a plan is developed. That's the current approach that we are using. It could be 5 years for Malawi. You might find it could be 2 years for the wine growing region. They might say, we are almost there. We only need a year or two. That's the approach. So it's based on the local context also. Yeah, thank you.
Do we need an explanation of the difference between minimum and living wage? I mean, in many countries, minimum wage is a legally set standard.
Yeah.
So maybe Christer, the Swedish model. I mean,
in Sweden we have a model.
Yeah, in Sweden we have the Swedish model, you know. Well, this is a very big difference, because this is why the Swedish model is called the Swedish model. We do not accept legally set minimum wages, because they are usually not set to actually correspond to the living costs of a person. And that's why the collective bargaining should not be restricted by trying to get minimum wages, and also not to raise minimum wages, but to set them by national collective bargaining. The difference also to other countries, many of the countries, Latin America, African countries, is that there are no national collective bargaining bodies. You bargain in your workplace. So that is also a difference. So what we're working towards, specifically in union-to-union projects, is of course strengthening trade unions and step by step making them form federations in a country, and maybe in the end influencing in the country's legal system, so that it is possible to form national trade unions in each sector, and therefore being able to do collective bargaining on a national level. But this is usually not possible today.
That was a good description, but you left one thing out. I mean, if you compare it to the Swedish one, we are still, the unions are still representing around 70%, which is 70% organized. And of course, what we are saying through our Swedish and also Nordic model is, of course, to the politicians, keep your sticky fingers away from the labor market, because that's dealt by the employers and the trade unions. But of course, it's highly linked to the capacity of a trade union to really organize it. It's the golden link between it, because if we fall underneath 50%, of course the employers will say, who do you represent?
Yeah. So
in the world, we have a affiliation to trade unions of about 7%. That's the median now in the world. It's pretty bad.
And I do hope you all go back home and read all the reports from us. But I can tell you a teaser that the gap in Malawi, for example, it's so high between the minimum wage and the living wage. So I mean, then also you need a longer plan as well. But that's a problem, of course, when the minimum is the normal. And even if fair trade certified plantations, we are over, of course, minimum. But you know, still, it's quite a big gap between the current situation, wages and living wage. So, and in South Africa with wine, it's closer. So,
question? No? Well, I'll ask a question also then. What happens if in a farm, if they say, okay, well, sure, we can accept trade unions, but there is no money for living wages. The farm doesn't have it. Are there other possible tools or better tools then to actually raise the living wages? We've talked about the benchmarking. How can you work towards the living wages if there is no money?
Good question, and a tough one, because basically we are talking of the ability to pay. If the employer is citing, I cannot manage, and we have had some of the employers actually pushing back, and some of them have actually said, okay, when we have the round table, first of all, as fair trade, what do you have within your control that you can influence to generate more money? And I talked about the minimum price. Can fair trade, can we collaborate and maybe work towards revising the minimum price for the products that we have upwards, and the difference is used to close the gap? Another school of thought says, let's maybe increase the premium percentage, and then the difference is used to close the gap, without necessarily asking the employer to go back to his pocket. So it's being seen also from the business perspective and the element of sustainability. And then the more reason why there has to be a lot of capacity building for everybody to get clarity. The unions, the employer, and us from fair trade. Yeah.
Hello? I can just... and I also think that, I mean, sometimes we also have to think about how cheap should the bananas be. And also, that's also, I think the money is there, but you know, you just have to think about where do the money goes to whom as well. And that's why it's so important to have the stakeholders together so we can see what can we do from fair trade system, because you have to pay a certain amount of money for it. That's a minimum price, like the bananas cost like this. And maybe we can have a calculation. Now we know the living wage. It should be a little bit more higher, maybe. But then maybe the trader needs to pay a little bit more. And then you know the others as retailers, and maybe in the end also a little bit also from the consumers. So, but I mean, if we want to achieve a living wage, I think we all need to take responsibility for doing that. So it's everyone needs to take a part, not only fair trade, I think.
Or you could do like in Sweden when ICA went out and said that, well, can you give another crown, Swedish crown, for the liter of milk? That's another way of dealing with it, if you have the will to do it, because farmers, cow farmers or milk farmers in Sweden are dying out. But I think also in a broader scale, I mean, let's be honest, I'm quite proud over the, even if it's not a real Nobel Prize, but the economy prize this year actually turned the coin in another direction, because everyone, I think everyone remembers when the Nobel Prize was handed out to the guy Friedman with the free market and everything that came with that, towards what we have today, getting a Nobel Prize. And of course it's also something we need to carry with us, because we need to go in a mind shift from the cheapest possible to the most, with the highest quality, and of course, I mean, as sustainable as possible. And doesn't matter if we are politicians or a consumer, father, or whatever we are. I think that's the mind shift that we need to keep in mind. Of course, it will cost a little bit more, but if the results are as good as they are around the world, why not?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes we forget. I think you said it to me last time we talked, Magdalena, that bananas are exotic fruits. I mean, we're prepared to pay a lot for a pineapple in Sweden, but we want to buy the bulk of the bananas. So I have one last question, and it's about the negotiation on a multinational level. We tend to forget that many of these, specifically the banana farms, are actually owned by big multinational companies. And this is, of course, more and more the fact with any edible produce and products today. There is a big multinational company in the head of it, and also in clothing, woods, furniture, and so on. So how do we work with the supply chain dialogue? What does fair trade do on that global level, and how do the trade unions do it? That would be the last question today, so short answers.
Yeah, I can try. But I think, you know, due to the fact that there are so big players as well, they are important to influence as well. And we do have a dialogue with them as well. And it's harder, it's tougher, of course. But I'm going to raise one thing, because regarding bananas, you know, certainly there was a movie called Bananas some years ago about how workers on a banana plantation being actually the worst condition you can ever think about, but also that it showed that there's a lot of pesticides in bananas as well just a couple of years ago. And I think that's also made Dole as a company feeling that they need to sell organic fair trade bananas in Sweden. And started with that, and I think that's a victory for the consumers, and also that we need to actually have a dialogue with the big actors, even if you say, oh, it's not that we certify. I mean, Dole is not fair trade certified, but they actually are selling fair trade certified organic bananas in Sweden, and that helps a lot of workers in those countries. And I think it's important to not only go for small companies, but also affect the bigger ones.
Yeah. Go on. I want to show you. Go on. Yeah. This demonstrates the commitment and the involvement of the business side. When you look at the Malawi program, we have the big buyers of tea, Tata Global, Taylor's, Tesco, Marks and Spencer, Van Lee's. They have to be involved, precisely as Magdalena has said. Yeah, and these are the people who committed on the 7th and 8th of this month in Malawi towards that program. Yeah.
Christer?
Yeah, quickly. I was like, wow, where's Nestle? You don't have Nestle, huh? No. Okay, then I can tell you a story why you don't have it. Because oh, maybe yes.
No, they're not
true.
the same.
Okay,
they're
Unilever. But anyway, I'm going to start with your picture. Because I think it's important to say that a lot of these don't have what we are trying to establish with them, which is an international framework agreement. And that's as simple as ILO. It's that they actually sign an agreement with a global union federation, which is, of course, sometimes a counterpart on the other side of the table, but also a partner. And what we demand in the negotiation is monitoring possibilities, to monitor and, of course, to follow the ILO core conventions out of getting people the power to organize. That's no question about it. But in some cases, I know IUF, because a lot of these are actually in the food industry. IUF has big, huge problems with some of them. Coca-Cola is not on there. But it's not fair trade yet. but for an example, Nestle is also something that has been approached by the municipal workers also here in Sweden and also globally with PSI when it comes to water, because their willingness to privatization of water is colliding with our view and the civil society view of water being a human right. So I mean, what we are trying to do from the global trade union movement, and of course also in Sweden, is to promote those global framework agreements or international framework agreements and as a tool. But we have some good examples also. SKF, ball bearings. They have been having this agreement for many, many years. And we are actually seeing that BMW, and shouldn't say Volkswagen, but anyway, they're good at one thing, and that's having a cooperation with the trade unions. And they have what we call, in the agreement states, World Workers' Council, where they actually have a chance annually to come together and also not only discuss what the company should be doing, but also, you know, as an industry as such and a sector. And I strongly believe that that's something we need to push even more. And that's transnational. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. This has been an unusually rich conversation. I hope that the audience felt the same. I think ending on this positive note, in knowing that there are tools, there are ways to go forward, there is a road to unity between civil society organizations and trade unions when working towards these goals of decent work and decent life. For us, sitting around these tables, our chance to actually kick ass is to demand fair trade goods, knowing where your consumption goods are coming from, and remain a trade union member. On that note, I would like to thank Christer and Magdalena and Zachary for your well-done presentations and wish you good luck in your endeavors. And thank you, the audience, for being here today and putting out some good questions for us. And do subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already to see what new other lunch seminars we do. And there's material outside that you can collect and bring with you. You can also order this from our organization, download directly from our webpage. On that note, I leave you to finish the coffee and have some conversation on your way out. Thank you very much for today.